Thanks, everybody. Good to be with you today. Excited to talk about digital auditing in action. My name's Cara. I'm a partner with our risk and compliance practice here at CrossCountry. Have spent my career in internal audit and SOX, both on the professional services side as well as on industry, part of my career. I'm joined by Steve Coppolino, who's a director in our risk and compliance practice, who has also spent his career in what I'll call internal audit and SOX advisory. And kind of most recently, before joining CrossCountry, he spent some time with the PCAOB focusing his efforts and attention on improving process and controls through innovation. So Steve's got a great background. We're also joined by Matt Johnson, who works in our business transformation group. And Matt specializes in bringing data analytics and visualization techniques into the CFO's shop. And then last, but definitely not least, is Kyle Slack, who is in our risk practice, but also specializes in what we call intelligent automation and data analytics. So Kyle will be walking us through some RPA methodologies that we use on the internal audit side. So with that, let's kind of look at our agenda. So we have three kind of big ticket items we wanted to cover off with you. The first one is cloud collaboration tools, right? In the world of digital auditing, where would we be, right, without cloud collaboration tools? And thinking about it in terms of maximizing productivity, team engagement, and audit and risk management. Then we'll spend some time with data analytics and visualization, helping to provide our clients valuable insights through the audit and risk management work that we do. And then last, leveraging analytics process automation, APA, might be new for some of us, as well as RPA, which many of us have been hearing a lot about that, to drive efficiencies as well as increase our audit coverage. So kind of setting the stage with cloud collaboration tools. I mean, it's helpful to talk about what we mean when we say cloud collaboration, because there's a lot in the cloud, but right, not everything in the cloud is a collaboration tool. So the way we think about it is collaboration tools are a way for our teams to work together on documents or deliverables, as well as engage with each other in real time, right, while we're in different locations, right? We're not all together. And so these tools are housed in the central cloud, thereby being accessible by other users. And some of the key activities that we're accomplishing through these tools include organizing team efforts on our work products, as well as creating that single source of truth, right? We're all operating from one kind of document or whatever it is that we're working on. We're working from one spot, enabling team and cross-functional communication. So not only within our team, but think broadly across your organization, all the functions that you're dealing with, that is a key part of this. Managing project status and productivity, making sure that everybody has transparency across the team on how the project is doing. Knowledge sharing is so key. Advancing employee professional development. I mean, it used to be we all had to be in the office and kind of working together to have that varied experience. Now we can have the varied experience wherever we are because we have access to all of the information and the tools that we need in the cloud. And then last, fostering a sense of community. And I think everyone's still figuring out what that looks like as we kind of emerge from this pandemic where we've been at home, kind of working from our home offices. So how do we develop that sense of community? Because having that is what makes our teams satisfied, productive, and just happy individuals all around. So with that, hand it over to Steve, kind of talk through some of the benefits of these tools as well as some of the challenges.
Great. Thank you, Cara, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. And as Cara mentioned, cloud-based collaboration has become so critical in how we do business in this post-pandemic working environment. We use tools for managing our engagement teams, brainstorming and collaborating together, delivering quality work products, and really just simply working with our customers. There are so many benefits to collaboration tools. There's a few listed here on the screen, and I'm going to expand just upon a couple of them. Collaboration tools have truly enabled remote work in an effective and safe manner for employees, companies, and our customers. Additionally, remote work has had the benefit in some instances to reduce travel and other overhead expenses. I know I could probably speak for most of us on the call, but our teams have proven over and over that they are able to effectively meet deliverable deadlines, whether they be products, audits, or financial close in this remote environment. Another benefit is the ability to share knowledge across our teams. pivot an approach, or even provide and take feedback on documents in a manner that's not only easy to do, but also supported by an audit trail. We use tools to track changes in documents with individuals adding comments or making edits real time. I haven't had to have a version 52 on a presentation in almost 2 years. Those who have worked with me in the past know this, that I am such a huge fan of a whiteboard. I haven't been able to sit still while telling a story since I was a kid, and my family still joke about it, and it's really hard to talk to you right now and stay seated. I've been accustomed to picking up and passing around a dry erase marker to talk through challenges and work through solutions. A whiteboard was actually my first purchase when we all transitioned to remote work, even before I bought a proper desk. When I discovered that there was whiteboarding functionality within many of the collaboration tools that Kara mentioned earlier that supported brainstorming, I was thrilled. And lastly, using collaboration tools for data and document centralization has been a real benefit to both our teams and, of course, our customers. Having a single source of truth for documents has removed version control challenges, provided easy access to documents and data needed to perform testing or other reporting functionality. On one of our clients, we found that by centralizing documentation within a tool and standardizing the nomenclature for that documentation, so whether it be the folder name, the file name formats, we were actually able to support not only the knowledge sharing and the audit trails for any of the changes, but we're also able to facilitate more easily using data for automation purposes, which we'll hear more about later. So what are some of the challenges that companies face as they try to adopt tools to support this cloud-based collaboration? So I'm going to attempt to bucket these into 3 groups. So my first bucket is investment. Financial and personnel resources are limited. The roadmap for system implementations and prioritization, given all the needs of an organization, include governance and security. They present a challenge for organizations to move to new tools. This isn't a new issue. We all know about this, but the value of the tool does need to be presented in order for the organization to buy in and invest. So secondly, you'll also talk about prioritization of not only financial resources, but personnel resources, looking specifically around the implementation of these tools. Aligning your stakeholders early in the planning process and working for the implementation of collaborative tools around major deliverables or audit due dates is critical for a successful implementation. If a collaborative tool is going to be used to support a key function, like an audit documentation or testing, it's important to plan the timing of that adoption around those timelines, or you're going to be facing situations where you may be using multiple tools throughout a cycle and therefore have inefficiency. My second bucket is functional. How will our new tool interact with the overall IT environment? Now, there could be functionality constraints, include downtime, lack of integration, and lack of integration with other applications that you may have. You may select too many tools. Buy-in and decisions at the enterprise level are very, very important. There's a risk of adopting too many tools. How and when will these tools be used? Do we have everyone using the same platforms? Next, you have privacy and information security concerns. We found this to be prominent within tool selection, especially when tools are being used for file and data storage. Is the data secured? Is it stored offshore or onshore? How does the organization feel about that? And does it present any concerns from the organization's risk tolerance or policies around cybersecurity? My third and final bucket is personal and personnel. So communication overload. We're able to receive communication from chats, emails, video calls, group messages, you name it. The communication strategy and the methods for communication at an organization really have to be understood and, if possible, documented and set up ground rules around them. I know at some of the organizations I've worked with, you use one tool for internal communication and another for external, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. A lack of knowledge. Are we using these tools and the functionality that's available within them to maximize efficiency? Are we using the full scope of that product? And lastly, there is a reduction of in-person contact, and this is a challenge for sure. I know we've all experienced it. And in some cases, there really is no substitute for in-person connections. So it's no surprise how critical cloud-based collaboration tools have been in our ability to operate during the pandemic. The criticality will continue in this post-pandemic and potential hybrid return to work environment. We found so much value in using collaboration tools for both audit management and in audit execution. Your internal audit teams really can do more with collaboration tools. We can leverage available capabilities and support various stages of the audit lifecycle. Using video chat tools for team and client discussions can help support risk assessment, planning meetings, and interviews. And it really does help us support dispersed teams and being able to staff the right people on the right projects. You're able to track progress of audit requests and also project management. On my teams, I've used a variety of collaboration tools, including project management tools, GRC tools, and ticketing solutions. These tools have supported an agile audit methodology, audit plan management, audit documentation requests that use kind of that central document and data repository, and also shared document editing that support work paper development and reviews. In one instance, we actually leveraged a ticketing system that recorded our audit deficiencies, tagged the responsible parties, it tracked remediation activities, and then also helped facilitate reporting on that and providing that status of the remediation over to leadership. So next, an area that will be covered actually in a few moments by my teammates on the panel today are efficiencies that can be gained from automated testing and reporting capabilities. And lastly, team communication and continuous monitoring. We have such an ability now to access and share data that includes analytics like KPI, audit testing progress, and our results. Presenting that data in a meaningful way creates opportunities for you and your stakeholders to share that information and glean better insights on your audits that would really maximize both your efficiency and the effectiveness of everyone's efforts. Matt, over to you, sir.
All right. So let's talk data analytics for internal audit. Before I dive into those specific examples, I really want to lay down the foundation of what data analytics is. So data analytics is the process of analyzing sets of data to find patterns, trends, and correlations that assist in making business decisions. So the key words here are making business decisions. Businesses have a lot of data, but most don't know what to do with it. And once you are able to capture the data, you'll see the benefits listed on the slide here. But to get those benefits, we'd like everyone to establish an internal audit data analytics program. So the first step in that is defining the objectives. Like any project, a company needs to define what the end goal is. What are you trying to achieve, and who is responsible for what parts of the project? Once everything is defined, you can move into the expectations part. I found it very challenging, especially for higher management, to get a grasp on what data analytics is and how it's going to be beneficial for the company. So when you're going through this process, you need to manage those expectations and don't promise everyone the world when you're first diving into data analytics. The second is going to be determine the relevant analytics for audit. So while there are key analytics that are relevant to all companies, each company needs to determine what is most important to them. A technology company could have different goals compared to a real estate company, especially when it comes to key metrics and analytics they are looking for. And then additionally, every project I have helped out with, including working with finance, accounting, and HR, has involved working with their IT department. You'll need to explain what systems you need, how many people will need access to those systems, and what level of permissions you'll need. If you're unaware of any of those questions, it's always a good place to start talking with IT now. So the next step is identify the relevant systems, the availability, and the quality of data. So in data analytics, you live by the phrase garbage in, garbage out. If the data you're working with is not good at the start, there's no way you're going to pull any meaningful data out of it. Therefore, before you start, you need to make sure all relevant systems have clean data. This might require building in controls around data entry, especially if it's entered manually. Just a few examples that I've seen in my work. I've seen people institute standardized forms, especially when uploading to ERP or CRM systems. Building in controls around character limits, especially if you're entering data in manually. And then strict due dates for time-sensitive data. So, for example, maybe all data needs to be submitted 2 weeks after quarter end, because if you're working with outdated data, then you can't pull any meaningful analysis out of it. And then finally, this last step here is actually acquire the data and develop and implement data analytics. So this is actually where the magic happens. We're pulling the data and building the data analytics to get more insights about your company. This is the last step and obviously the main reason why you're here. But please note, there's just a lot of planning ahead and more than people think. So any good project manager knows, the better the plan, the better the results. So we'll keep moving on here and talk about data visualization. Data visualization is an excellent way of conveying a message utilizing raw data. So instead of looking through raw data points, a user can look through an interactive visual, whether it be a simple bar chart or a complex tree map, to gain a better understanding of the data and its meaning. So visualizations allow a user not as familiar with the data to gain an understanding of a process or metric. It's easier to explain a bar chart than presenting an Excel sheet with a million rows of data. Not only that, but you can utilize visualizations to assist in identifying relationships, trends, and patterns within your data. This is the investigative part of data analytics, and sometimes you find things you weren't even expecting. Once you identify an outlier, visualizations give you the opportunity to drill down into your data. For example, if you notice a month's revenue increased by tenfold compared to the prior year, a user can isolate that month's data and see what is causing that difference. Finally, through visualization programs, you can set up reports that are sent out monthly, weekly, and if you're even having fun, send out daily. No more waiting for responses on emails or someone preparing an Excel report. The visualization program will automatically pull data from a system, generate that report, and send out to the key stakeholders for that particular process. So before we move on, we just want to compare traditional versus data visualization. Traditional reporting consists of using programs we're all familiar with, so Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, and PowerPoint. These programs are fine to work with and provide basic reporting options, but give the user a more static environment. Once a report or visual is completed, it's hard to change that end result, leading to more work if something else is requested. Comparing that to a data visualization, we see more value add with the capabilities it provides. The reports are interactive, letting the users click through and change the report on the fly. Once a visualization is created, the user will only have to refresh the data source and not have to repeat the work all over again for that specific report. So moving on, we're going to talk about our audit analytics maturity progression. So I like this slide a lot because it emphasizes an important point that implementing data analytics and visualizations into your internal audit process is a journey, not just a quick 2-week sprint. So starting with the first step here, it's going to be ad hoc. So this means if you need a metric or a data point, you'll have an individual put together a file, most likely in Excel, to get that particular answer. There's no standardized way of putting together this report, and it won't be documented so future employees can repeat this particular process. Everyone is still getting the right answer here, but just not in an efficient way. So once you move into the structured part of the journey, a company is really building out and implementing a data analytics program. You'll have a strategic direction not only talked about, but documented. A company will have clear metrics that they're looking for and will build specific models through new and old programs that are documented well. We then move into the repeatable process. This is where data analytic processes are designed and verified and then become repeated without human intervention. We are at the testing stage of the new analytics and completely integrated them within your audit. This means you have a program scheduled to pull the data, perform that analysis on the data without human interacting with that particular report. The end user can now rely on the results with little to no risk. And then finally, the last stage here is just highlighting that things can change within data analytics. A new data source can become available or a new metric is needed for a report, but a company is staying aware of those needs and will keep them in the last stage. So this will continuously improving their data analytics program. And just from my experience, I have seen most companies stay between the structured and repeatable of the journey, but no worries if you're not there. It's a quick journey from ad hoc to structured as well. So now let's talk about putting both of those concepts together. When you combine data analytics and visualizations, you come to the point where you're fully automating an audit process. So this is where the data is being pulled directly by data analytics program, being transformed and prepared by those programs, and ultimately being loaded into visualizations. So once everything is automated, you get a lot of great benefits. One of the most notable advantages is the time savings. This will be shown better in our examples later on in the presentation, but these data analytics and visualization programs can operate a lot faster than humans, which results in manual hours saved. These hours saved allow employees to focus on more value-add tasks instead of focusing on just the preparation and cleansing of the data. Additionally, because there are less humans touching the process, it is less prone to human errors that we see every day. The higher quality output also includes a greater audit coverage because data analytics and visualization programs are capable of handling more data. And once everything is automated, these tasks can be scheduled to run in the background, completing that continuous automated environment. So I hope everyone's brain is turning and thinking about how to implement these things into their current internal audit process, but where do you start? So at the bottom of the slide here, we've just listed out our steps that we found helpful when identifying a potential candidate. So the first step is identifying what you would like to automate. I always like to say that automation is born from frustration. So if you ever see a task that's annoying to you, that might be a good candidate. So in general, these processes are simple, repetitive, and aren't really constantly changing. There is some flexibility here, but the more standardized the report or the process, the better the candidate. So the next step is to take a deep dive into that process and start to document the steps that are taken. So this involves connecting with those key stakeholders and individuals that are in charge of that current process and documenting those steps in a standardized way through programs such as Visio or other process flow programs, or even just on a Word document or Excel sheet, just making sure we have those steps listed out. The last step is just putting pen to paper and actually building out the automation through the various tools at your disposal. We have included a list here on the deck, but by no means is that inclusive of everything. I always get questions from my clients, what is the best tool? My answer is always the dreaded, it depends. I always can't recommend just a blanket tool because there's a lot of things that affect my tool recommendation. It depends on the environment of the client, the systems the company use, and then what are the tools that are currently available through a company. So moving on, we're going to talk about analytics process automation, or APA. APA refers to the concept of giving the ability to the end user to write and develop automations for their needs without having to go to another department like IT. This is possible because these tools that we are discussing have matured enough to where any business user can quickly learn and deploy automations within their departments. Automation programs have moved away from requiring that strict coding background to low or no code programs that are accessible to everyone. These programs help solve some of the largest issues with data analytics. They can pull from multiple different data sources, aggregate them together, all the while reducing the risk of human error. So with that, let's dive into some real-world examples that I have seen. So here's our first use case. This revolves around a company who was manually reconciling a termination list from 2 different systems once per week. Originally, they were pulling an Excel file from PeopleSoft and an Access and manually comparing the data through various formulas and actions within Excel. So our solution here was to incorporate Alteryx and Tableau to improve this process. The inputs are directly inputted into Alteryx. One thing to highlight here is that Alteryx and many of the other data analytics programs handle the vast majority of different data types. So we always get questions here, can Alteryx connect to blank type database or connect to blank file type? The answer is almost always yes. Most of these programs have become very inclusive in what they can connect to. So once the data is extracted into Alteryx, it performs all of the manual processes that surround data preparation. Think of anything that surrounds clicking within Excel, like filtering, adding or moving rows or columns, to writing our beloved VLOOKUP formulas. All of that now is set up within Alteryx. And finally, the results are loaded to visualization software. The visualization is automatically sent out to the auditors, eliminating the back and forth through email. So in total, through this use case, we actually have saved over 50 employee hours every month. And with that, I'll move on. We do have a video showcasing this particular use case. So right now you're looking at the desktop. This is a recording of the automation being ran. We're showing that we have our 2 different data sources. If you're unfamiliar, this is what the Alteryx program looks like. You can see it's currently running. Each of those green boxes with the tools around them are showing that that step is being taken. So it's pulling out that data like I was talking from PeopleSoft, Excel, and pulling it into the program, manipulating it, and then outputting it into a certain location. And we have that this document. This is the output, and this is all of the discrepancies between the 2 programs. So you can see, instead of writing all those formulas to find the differences between the 2 systems, you can see that we can automatically generate that and fix it on the fly. So I'll move on to our second use case here. And so this is just a general use case. It's a comparison between 2 different systems with the same transaction data. Now, in a perfect world, they should align, but as we all know, that's usually not the case for one reason or another. So with this one, our inputs are from two different systems that contain a large amount of data. The previous way of doing this was just downloading an Excel report from each system and manually comparing them. However, the files were so large that it took hours to extract the data. And then even worse, in the file size resulted in multiple Excel crashes. I've been there many times where I've opened a file that was too large, it grays out on my screen, and then I get the spinny wheel of death, and I lose hours of work because I wasn't able to save. Alteryx and other programs are just better at handling these large volumes of data. My personal record in Alteryx is about 115 million rows running through the program while just using a standard issue laptop. So once Alteryx extracts the data from both of the systems and performs the reconciliation on its own, so you don't need to remember to run the program as well. A lot of these programs have the capability of actually scheduling them and running every month and sending out the reports automatically. So the end result here was a comparison between the two different systems, identifying the difference between each system and saving hundreds of hours yearly. And so with that, I will now show you a video of this use case just to give you a reference of what this looks like. So again, this is the Alteryx interface connected to both of our systems. So once we run it, like I was talking about, there's a lot of data being pulled, but as you can see, that was just 1.7 seconds. So instead of waiting for those hours of extractions, Alteryx is just handling that data a little bit faster. And then here's the end result, where this is a simplified output. You can get a lot more fancy with it, but basically it's just showing the data that existed in one system and not the other, vice versa, and also if the records existed in both, but the amounts were mismatched. So just a basic example, but see how the power that's saved just by pulling the data into a different system rather than downloading those Excel files and doing it manually. So with that, our time is over together, but I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Kyle here to talk about RPA.
Thanks so much, Matt. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of time here to level set with everybody on robotic process automation, or RPA, what its capabilities are, and then I'll start tying it into auditing and some of the use cases where we've seen it be successful in that field. So first off, what is RPA? So it's a technology where a specialized computer program, or bot as we call it, is configured to emulate the actions of a human interacting with digital systems to execute a business process. So how does it work? RPA bots utilize the user interface to interpret information, trigger responses, and communicate with applications to perform a vast variety of repetitive tasks. A great benefit of RPA operating in this way is that it's a non-invasive technology. RPA can leverage existing IT infrastructure without causing disruption to underlying systems. This makes it relatively straightforward and cost-effective to implement in comparison to traditional computer programming developing methods. So kind of talking about what are some of the capabilities of RPA? What can this do for you? So the first off is mimicking human actions with the user interface. So as I kind of just mentioned, RPA bots interact with web and computer applications through a computer's user interface, which is the same way humans interact with these applications. This allows bots to mimic many user actions. Think of clicking, typing, using hotkeys or shortcuts, and then you can combine these smaller actions together in a sequence. And with that, RPA bots can navigate through a website, search a database, move files and folders around, copy and paste data, fill in forms, and so much more. The next bit is extracting data and manipulating data. So RPA bots can extract individual pieces of data or entire data tables if it's in a structured format, meaning it's got consistent labeling or consistent location. Think of like an Excel spreadsheet, you're always going to find the data in columns A through L, something along those lines. So it's capable of extracting data from multiple sources. So it can be a website or a web application. It can be an Excel spreadsheet, a PDF form, text or CSV documents. So it's very flexible with where it can get data from and what applications it works with. So once data has been extracted from a source, that data can be manipulated and populated into another source. So an online form, a new spreadsheet, or an ERP system. Some of the common data manipulation used in RPA is like sorting and filtering data tables, combining and rearranging columns, replacing or reformatting data values, or simple calculations like counts, sums, and multiplication. RPA can also replicate many of the formulas you may be familiar with and use often in Excel, like VLOOKUPs and SUMIFs. Then we talk about the scalability, the scheduling, and the monitoring. So RPA bots can run many different process automations, albeit not at the same time. It has to do one at a time, but they can be scheduled to run these process automations at regular intervals, or it can be run on demand. RPA bots can be and often are run on virtual machines. This allows the bot to run unattended 24/7 without interrupting a user's ability to complete work on a host device, their own laptop. Some RPA tools do also include features that track and log everything that a bot does during its execution of the automation and what changes people make to the bots, creating a useful audit trail in both cases. This can be helpful if you're using RPA on your own, so you know what happened during the bot's execution, or it's very helpful if you're auditing an RPA process. You can see all the actions that the automation that took place during the automation's run. So next, we kind of want to talk about what makes a process a strong candidate for RPA. And I'd really separate these criteria here into two different groups. The criteria on the top row here is really what criteria must be met for it to be possible to automate a process or realistic to automate a process. And then the bottom row there is really what criteria should be met to make it worth it to automate a process. It's time efficient. So in that first group there, standardize. You want a process with well-defined and repeatable steps, inputs, and outputs. A bot can only be configured to execute a process that is consistent and predictable. Rules-based. So a process where where each action completed is based on a clearly defined set of rules. There's no, judgment that this bot is required to do. You kind of set it up with these logical preset decisions. So a bot really requires a rule for each situation to know what action to execute given the circumstances. Then structured and machine-readable inputs and outputs. So processes that use structured and machine-readable data sets for the input and as the output. Again, think of Excel spreadsheets, Word document forms or, website forms, fields in a web-based application, those sorts of things. Now, structured electronic data sets are required as structure provides a consistent format that allows a bot to identify the correct data set. It's always going to be kind of in the same place with the same labeling. And the data set being machine readable allows the bot to understand that information. And then finally, we got in the bottom row here, kind of what makes it worth it. It's critical to select processes where the juice is worth the squeeze. So high volume and high frequency. Processes that include many transactions or time-consuming routine processes that are performed frequently. Automating a time-consuming process with high transaction volume or high frequency will provide more value and a greater return on your investment. For example, it will be much more helpful to automate a daily process that takes an hour each day. That really adds up. It's several hundred hours rather than an annual process that only takes 4 hours each time. That's not really worth the development time it will take to set it up. It does take a time investment to build, test, and implement an RPA solution. And we got limited process complexity. So processes where there are a limited number of exceptions, where the process would have to differ from the normal set of actions. For each exception that is involved in the process, it becomes more complicated to automate it. It's important to note that this is not necessarily an issue if exceptions can be handled with the same series of steps. And then finally, a stable environment. Processes involving steps and applications that are mature and not expected to change. This will reduce development time as additional bot maintenance will not be required to configure the bot for changes down the road. Of course, changes do come up and a bot can be updated to handle an updated process. You just want to limit this change as much as possible. Next, we'll kind of start tying it into, okay, RPA and internal audit. How can you do it? So kind of when thinking about the capabilities of RPA that I mentioned and the criteria of what makes a process a good candidate for an RPA solution, hopefully you can think of some ways to utilize this kind of technology to aid an internal audit team in your audit processes. We really think there are many automation opportunities across the audit lifecycle, as we kind of are showing in this graphic here. We kind of just have a few examples of where it may be helpful, but it's really just scratching the surface. There may be way more opportunities depending on what audit processes and what your audit team does. We would say RPA is especially useful for gathering data or documentation, like identifying a population, collecting control evidence, gathering reports or data needed for, as inputs for a compliance audit, for data entry, so maybe in generating a control work paper or populating a control lead sheet, whether that be in Excel or a GRC tool, for administrative tasks like sending out document request list emails or issue due date emails, reminder emails, that sort of thing. And for simple but large scale validations and calculations, something like a periodic access review or a reconciliation of some sort. In the upcoming slides, I'm going to dive deeper into a couple use cases, specific use cases where RPA has been implemented and to automate audit processes. Specifically, I'll walk through an example of gathering control evidence with RPA and then a periodic reconciliation process with RPA. So I will move into the first use case here. All right, so for our first use case here, as I mentioned, it's for gathering control evidence. So the challenge here was to assist the audit team with gathering evidence for their change management 𝗙𝗔𝗧𝗖𝗛 control procedures more efficiently. We really saw this as a strong candidate since the client utilized a web-based workflow ticketing system. Think of like ServiceNow or Jira. Jira was used in this case to perform and document their change management control procedures. A workflow ticketing system helps to standardize the process and provide structured data for the bot to work with. Automating the process comes with the benefit of eliminating the need to manually gather information and documentation from controls testing, which can often be one of the most time-consuming parts of audit. So the existing steps in the process involved extracting approval information and obtaining a PDF copy of the change management record from the workflow ticketing system, saving those PDF files to designate a work paper folder, and then finally populating that approval data that was kind of used as an input for the controls testing into the control work paper. So to automate this process, we performed the following steps. I would say first, and this is really a universal step across all automations, it's gaining an understanding of that current process. We learned how the audit team locates change management requests in the workflow ticketing system, what they had to search for, what information was required there, what information needs to be gathered for each change management request. So approver, who submitted it, what the approval date was, maybe some of the test steps, who's testing it, various things. Then we reviewed the control work paper to identify where we're getting the key inputs from. In this case, that's kind of the change management request number. That's the unique identifier. And then the outputs. Where are we putting this approval information once we gather it? So it's critical to understand the current process, like the inputs and the outputs and the applications utilized to identify exactly what tasks the bot needs to perform in each situation and determine if it's possible or practical to automate the process. After gaining a clear understanding, we utilized an RPA platform, in this case UiPath, to design and develop an automation process to replace that existing manual process. The result here being a significant time savings. It reduced the processing time to 20 to 30 seconds per sample. For a sample of 25, it completed the whole process in less than 9 minutes, much less time than it would take manually. And really, one of the cool things about this time savings is it opens up the door for validating and testing the full population, providing even greater assurance. Because now a quick and practical method for gathering the necessary documentation, which would be kind of impractical before. And we actually did do this. We expanded this from a sample of 25 to the full population in this year. That's hundreds of samples that we were able to get in just a couple hours. You know, you gotta just turn it on at the end of the day, and you'll have all the documentation ready when you come in the next day. So it was very effective for that. On this next slide, I'm going to share a demonstration video of this actual bot in action to kind of give a visualization of how RPA operates. And while the video is playing, I'll try to provide some commentary. All right, so the first part here is not actually the bot. This is kind of just me for demonstration purposes, showing the starting point here. This is the start of the control work paper. And all that's in there is that one column filled with the change management request numbers. So the bot, in one of its first steps, opens up that Excel file in the background and pulls all that information out, makes it into a list, knowing that we then have to log into this workflow ticketing system and start for each one of these request numbers, search for it. It pulls up the record as it's showing here, and then it pulls up kind of a print version of it that has all the information we're looking for. It gathers all that information super quickly, saves the PDF, again, super quickly. It happens sometimes almost a little too fast to see. So we have a couple, it going through a couple samples here where you can kind of see it. It really, in just a couple seconds, is able to pull all that approval information, and it's saving the PDF files. And as it's going through this, it's kind of building a virtual data table, if you will, that contains all the approval information for each one of the change management samples. And so once it's finished looking for all those, gathering the information, it closes out the website, and then it inputs it all into the Excel work paper. And then this is, again, me at the end. It's not the bot. The rest of it was the bot. This is me just showing, hey, it populated all that information into the control work paper. And here you can kind of see the work paper folder where we have the PDFs saved to. So I will move to the next slide here to talk about a second use case. I'll try to go through this one a little bit quicker. So this one was to assist a client audit team with reconciling contractual rates to the actual invoice amounts charged to customers by individual service package and feature. So this reconciliation was really complicated by the fact that the client had a real large size of customers, 9,000 plus, that all had these multiple contracts with unique terms, and the client wanted the ability to audit every single invoice line item. So the team was able to build an RPA bot to help with this reconciliation. It kind of used Excel and RPA together to build out the automation, and this really resulted in a dramatic time savings for the client. It took them 9.5 minutes for the bot to run through 710,000 invoice line items, performing these pricing lookups for each row and identifying discrepancies. The process previously took the audit team, weeks to complete. So this automation really introduced the ability to perform line-by-line invoice verification, and then it increases the ability to identify and investigate potential revenue leakage from underbilling customers. That's one of those things we talked about. Matt mentioned it. Performing greater value add activities. So, since you don't have to spend this time on, performing the line by line reconciliation, you now can really look into some of these situations where there's discrepancies and find if there's any revenue leakage. So that's one of the cool things that's opened up with RPA. Finally, I'll just speak a little bit on comparing the two technologies. I think I would just say that they both have their own sets of strengths and weaknesses. I would say APA is really preferred when a process is super data intensive, when you're dealing with messy data sets or complex calculations or analytics, whereas RPA is really better for transactional processes that have these repeating steps for independent transactions, or processes that utilize the user interface a lot, navigating through the user interface. And then I would say it's important to note that these technologies can be utilize together to create the final automation solution. I've done that before. They do work well together as well. They both have built-in integration to a ton of widely used applications like the Microsoft Office suite, workflow ticketing systems, audit and GRC tools, and many more, which can make it even easier to build some of these automations. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Cara to kind of conclude and summarize what we've talked about here today. Thank you, guys.
Take us home. Thanks so much, Kyle. Well, I know we covered off a lot of material. This world of digital auditing, it's kind of like the opportunities are endless, but just kind of summarizing everything here, first, cloud collaboration tools is kind of at the core of what our teams are working through, right? A couple things to think about, consider what your team has access to develop, and then develop a plan to strategically use those tools. Sometimes we have access to tools throughout the organization and we don't realize it, right? So figure out you have access to other tools that you're not using. And then address any challenges to effective adoption of any kind of cloud collaboration method. So buy-in is key to having people use the tools. And then last, continue to drive coordination across the business and what we call 3 lines of defense, right, to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness. So it's not just our audit teams, it's all of our stakeholders that we're working with throughout the process. On data analytics, right, embedding data analytics within the internal audit is no longer kind of like, oh, nice to have, right? Even if you're just using it for the planning and the risk assessing of what you're going to focus on in an audit, downloading a bunch of data, finding if there are any trends there that need analysis, any outliers that when you're looking through it stand out that need review. I mean, that's a great way to use analytics. APA tools enable the automation of those analyses if you're at that level. And then APA tools can also be used to automate our data-driven audit procedures that were previously manual. So APA is really up and coming, and we have been seeing more clients use them. And then lastly, kind of what Kyle was talking about, RPA. These tools, right, can be used to automate our manual procedures. We do a lot. We mentioned, I think, ITGCs, looking at terminations of people when they leave the organization, terminating their access, doing that testing. We've done a lot with RPA there because that tends to be a very manual process. But there are lots of kind of routine tests, I think, that internal audit tends to do that we can automate through using RPA. We've wrapped up our presentation. Happy to hand it back to you, and just thank you, everybody, for dialing in today.